2 weeks ago, we talked about what we call the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are meek. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the peacemakers. And it talked about who we are. Last week, we talked about what we do. We are the salt of the earth. We are the light of the world. And this week, we enter into a passage that is almost unparalleled in literature. 6 times, Jesus says, "You've heard that it was said, but I say to you." We're going to take 3 of them. But before doing, let me tell you that Jesus is talking to his disciples and the people who are there, who are all followers, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves. But then he says, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will have no part or will not enter the kingdom of heaven. To which their hearts dropped. They thought, there's no way. The Pharisees, if they were anything, they obeyed every little jot and tittle. But then Jesus goes on and shows us what he means. And it is profound. Let's get going. Let's look at it. He says, "You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." Now, the word he uses here for anger is not thumos, which is a very popular word in the Greek. It means to be angry. It means you get angry quick, but then it dies down. He doesn't use that word. He uses the word ogre. And it's a different kind of anger. It's an anger that remembers. It is resentment. It is bitterness. It is brooding. It is anger that scratches the scab to keep the anger alive. It is anger that takes the person out of their imagination, slaps them around a little bit, and then throws them back in the cage. It is a brooding, resentful anger, and he links it to judgment. And then he says, and if you says to a brother, "Raka," you'll be answerable to the court, which means the Sanhedrin. He's taken the offense up. The first one is you're answerable to the council, now to the Supreme Court. Raka does not translate well. Best translations are empty-headed, idiot. But it really is a sign of contempt. It is treating another person contemptuously. It is elitism. It is snobbery. Of course, it is racism. It's a person or a group of people saying, "You are not my equal. Get out of my way." Raka. And then he says, anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, of course, he's taken the punishment up here. The word he uses for "you fool" is moros. And it does not mean intelligence. He's not saying, "Oh, you person of limited intellectual ability." No, it means moral foolishness. Jesus is talking about gossip. He's talking about character assassination. He's talking about killing somebody, not with a knife and not with a gun, but with words. And he says, this is so serious. You do this and you're in danger of the fire of hell. Do you remember back in the Old Testament, in the 4th chapter of the book of Genesis, Cain is brooding under a tree because his sacrifice wasn't pleasing to God. And God comes to him and says, "Get a hold of your anger. Behold, sin is crouching at your door and longs to master you." He did not get a hold of his anger, and he killed his brother. And from that day to this day, anger and murder have been linked. Murder doesn't just happen. We have other words for that. Involuntary manslaughter, crime of passion. Murder begins in the heart, with a seething resentment, with a superiority. And Jesus is saying, I'm not just after the end product, which is pulling a trigger or we're stabbing with a knife. No. I want to get at the root of it, the seed of it. And the seed of it is a heart that resents, a heart that says raka, a heart that speaks callously and assassinates other people's character. And Jesus is saying the seed of it is as sinful as the actual act. Now, the Pharisees would never dream of killing somebody, although Jesus made them want to very badly. But they hid all these thoughts in their hearts. And so Jesus goes on and says, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come offer your gift. Now, he's talking about the Old Testament sacrificial system where somebody would bring a bull or lamb and offer it to God. Of course, we use the altar today as well, and we bring gifts. The gift would be ourselves. Some of you just did that. And he says, so if you're at the altar and you remember that there's some real junk going on between you and a brother, don't pray anymore. Leave your gift there. Go and settle matters with that brother or sister, then come back. What he is saying is this. Our relationship with Jesus Christ isn't just us and Jesus. It's not a vertical relationship. It's you and me and Jesus. And if I've got a problem with you, and if I resent you, and if I feel superior to you, I've got a problem with the one who loves you. And I've got to settle that. Jesus is after people who are holy from the inside out. This is the type of follower he wants. We can hide these things. No one will know, at least not for a while. It doesn't show up on our breath. But Jesus says, this is sinful. He goes on then, and he says, you've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, the word there that he used for lustfully is more often translated as longing or longed or desire. Let me give you 3 scriptures that have the exact same word that is translated here as lustfully. Luke 15:16, the middle of the prodigal son parable. And the prodigal son now has fallen upon very hard times, and he's feeding pigs. And it says in Luke 15:16, he longed, same word, lustfully. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. He longed. It's not a fleeting thought. It's not a temporary thing. It is a pervasive, dwelling thought. He is starving. He longs. Luke 16:20. He's talking about Lazarus and the rich man. He's using a parable. At the gate was a beggar named Lazarus who was covered with sores and longed, that's the same word, lustfully, longed to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Not a passing thought. And then in Luke 22, Jesus said to his disciples, I have eagerly desired, same word, lustfully. I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Now, what this tells us is, when he says, if you look at a woman lustfully, it's not saying, oh, she's pretty, and then moving on, and you don't give much thought. No. He's talking about being preoccupied, like a starving man who longs to eat. He's saying you look at that woman or you look at that man and you say, wow, if I had the chance. And then you go through this mental fantasy thing where it's as if in your mind you're already doing it. And he says, that is adultery, whether or not you actually do the act. You remember there's a story about King David in 2 Samuel 11, and it begins by saying, in the spring of the year when kings go off to war, David didn't, which is a big part of the problem with what follows. So he is in his palace, he's on the roof of his palace, the palace being the tallest building in town for security purposes, and he looks over and there is a lady buck naked on her roof taking a bath. Now, if he had just looked once and said, oh, and moved on, he'd been all right. Now, some people say lust is the second look. Well, and that's not necessarily true because some of you would just look long the first time. Right? But he looks, and then he looks, and he calls his servants to him, and he says, who is that? Well, they said, well, that's Uriah, the Hittite, who is serving you in the front lines. That's his wife, and she's alone. And he said, go get her. Bring her to me. Now, I want to tell you that is where adultery happened. Not later when he actually performed the act, but adultery happened, the sin happened right there because he said, go get her. What was he going to talk to her about? They weren't about to exchange recipes for cauliflower souffle. Now, if she had come before him and said, oh, great king, you will have to slay me, I wouldn't do it, he probably would have backed down and said, no, this was only a test. I was just testing you. But he still would have committed adultery. It was a decision. He had already placed it in his mind. And Jesus is saying, stop that. Don't do that. Look at one another with pure eyes. Now, we need help with this. That's why the Holy Spirit helps us. So he goes on and he says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. He then goes on and says, and if your right hand, the right eye, the right hand being the preferred, right always being preferred over the left in Scripture. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. And in Luke's gospel, he adds a foot. If your right foot causes you to sin, throw it away. What's he saying? Is he saying literally do these things? Well, the early disciples, many of them did. And there was a whole bunch of people walking around half blind with one arm and one leg. And the early church father says, no. This is not what Jesus is after. He's not after self-mutilation. Now, he's talking very drastically, and we need to take drastic measures. But when he says, cut out the right eye, he's saying, don't look. Well, just don't look. And if you're in a situation where, that is always going to be there and you're here, then don't be here. Don't look. And when he says, cut off a hand, he says, don't hold that. Don't hold it. Change your lifestyle. Don't do that. Cut off a foot. Don't go there. If being with these people always sets you up to be your worst self, then don't be with those people. Don't go there. He wants disciples. He wants followers that love him from the inside out, from pure hearts. Now, the Pharisees would never dream of committing adultery, but their minds played these mental images of what this person might look and what this might be like to be with this person over and over again. And Jesus is saying, I don't want a bunch of people that look smart and good on the outside. No, I want people who are pure from the inside out. And then he goes on and says, it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. I want to spend some time here. And I know I'm speaking to three groups of people. I'm speaking to one group of people who are married. I'm speaking to another group of people who are married but are struggling in their marriage. And don't worry, we don't necessarily know who you are. I mean, we all wear masks, and you hide that well, and that's not a criticism. I'm just saying I'm not speaking to certain people. I'm not. And then there's another group of people who've been through divorce. And I'm going to speak to each of you. And I'll say this to that last group. There's nothing in me that wants anybody to walk away from here feeling like, well, I blew that one. No, not at all. There is great grace, and we'll talk about that. But let's talk about this first. Matthew 19 fleshes this out a little bit. It begins with some Pharisees coming to Jesus, and they ask, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason, they ask. Jesus answered, haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female? And he said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Jesus blows past the law of Moses and goes right back to creation and said, this is the way it was from the beginning. Picking up the story, and I've put this in a different color because it's not the same text. This is Matthew 19. Why then, they asked, did Moses command, and interesting that they use the word command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you, you ninnies. He didn't command you. He permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Jesus is talking about a portion of Scripture found in Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4. And it says, if you find something, he's speaking to husbands because the Old Testament, in fact, all the Bible is written to men, women couldn't read. A very male-dominated society, and a time, ladies, when women were just a cut or two above property. You had no legal rights. You could not initiate divorce. And it says, to the men, so if you find something indecent in your wife, you give her a certificate of divorce and send her on her way, witnessed by one or two other people. Now, something indecent leaves a lot of room for interpretation, and two schools of thought sprung up. One was by the Rabbi Shammai, and he was very strict on his interpretation, and he says that something indecent means unchastity. It means some kind of fornication or adultery. Now, the school of thought that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law followed was the school of thought under the Rabbi Hillel, who said something indecent can be interpreted much more liberally to mean if she burns your toast, if she talks about your father, if she doesn't keep herself up, if there's a younger model that's more attractive, whatever it is, it's indecent to you, give her a certificate of divorce and send her away. Now, this Deuteronomy 24 passage was made by God to protect women because they were just being so abused prior to this. And now at least they had a certificate where they could go and, if they wanted to, marry someone else. So Jesus comes back in the Matthew 5 and says, but I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her a victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. You know, I've married a lot of people. I wish I knew how many. You know, I've been in ministry for 33 plus years. I have no idea. But I have yet to perform a wedding when one member of the couple says to me before the wedding, you know what, I'm hoping to get 5 good years out of this marriage. That's what I hope. 5 good years, that'd be great for a first marriage. No. Every person I have ever married says, I want to go the distance. I want this to last. And some of them do. And some of them don't. Life happens. Things get tough. Kids come. But we can make it. There's a book I want to recommend to you. In fact, if I had one book that I could just say, God, give it to everybody, make them read it, it would be this book. If you're married or thinking about getting married, it's Love and Respect by Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. I've read a lot of books. I've got a library full of books. But this is the number one book that I recommend for premarital counseling and for all marriages, whether your marriage is in crisis or not. It just will help. Foundational truth. It's taken from the Ephesians passage where it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and wives, respect your husbands. And I don't have time to flesh that out anymore, but that is profound. He says this, no matter how desperate or how hopeless, if a husband or wife both have basic goodwill in their hearts, they can stop the craziness, the crazy cycle, and they can get a hold of themselves. Let me show you what happens in many, many, many marriages. Over here, this great and average and poor is how people would evaluate their marriages. And down here, this is ages, 20, 30, 40, 50. So when someone gets married, obviously they get married at a highlight, and what they expect is that it's going to go on like that for the rest of forever. But life happens, doesn't it? Life happens and kids come, and what normally happens is when the kids really start to get to be teenagers, the satisfaction in the marriage really declines. And there's good reason for this. You are a chauffeur. You're running to band camp and to choir practice and to soccer and to dance lessons, and you're going here and you're going there. And the husband sometimes has to work at 2 jobs and the wife working and but then the kids grow and they get out of the house, and lo and behold, the marriage improves. Now, it doesn't happen like this every time. Sometimes it's much worse, right? And sometimes it's not quite as bad. But there is here, in this messy middle, this time where you think, what's happening? There is not a couple I have married in the last, 10, 15 years that I have not said this. That as beautiful as you look today, there will come a time, whether it's 3 years or 13 or 33 years, there will come a time when you will think what you're doing today was a terrible mistake. I said, don't let that rock you, because it happens to everyone. And it happens to everyone more than once. Don't let it rock your world. In marriage, you fall in and out of love. The key is make sure you keep falling back in love with the same person. Tomorrow marks 41 years for my wife and I. 41 years. I am, if you know my wife, I am a blessed man. But at year 7, we had a crisis time in our marriage. I was in seminary, of all things. We had a baby girl. You've met her. She's preached here. I was working full-time and going to seminary full-time. Debbie was a stay-at-home mom, and she was depressed. She was diagnosed with postpartum depression, which is not uncommon. And they gave her some pills. Now, of course, we were Christians and knew that Christians don't take those kind of pills. We pray about it, so we flushed them. We know better today. And she really struggled, and we struggled. And our marriage got to the point where we weren't talking much, and when we were talking, it wasn't good with one another. I remember she was giving our baby a bottle across the room. We were having some kind of conversation. And I look up, and I see a baby bottle coming for my head. And it was glass. It wasn't, and at the last moment, I duck, and this glass bottle shattered on the wall behind me. Now, I don't want to say anything negative about my wife. You all know her. She's lovely. I'm sure it was me that provoked her. But she got to the point where, nuts with you, Buster, and just was going to take me out. So in that season, one day we took a long drive. And we stopped the car in a church parking lot, out in the middle of nowhere. We were in seminary. And I remember saying to her, this isn't working. And I don't like this. And you don't like this. And it would be a lot easier for us just to quit it and walk off and get a divorce. But our parents are praying for us. Our grandparents are praying for us. There are generations before them that have prayed for us. As far as I know, there's been no divorce in either one of our families going as far back as we can find. And we've created this beautiful little girl. I think we have to do everything we can do to try to make this work. She said with a degree of reluctance, well, I agree. And we decided there in that church parking lot we were going to make it work. And I can tell you things didn't improve right away, but there was a turning point there. And let me tell you a few things that we began to do coming out of that. And it didn't get better overnight, but it did get better. We began right then to say the divorce word, the D word, is no longer in our vocabulary. We don't talk about it. It's off the table. We determined that we were going to have a weekly date night, that every Friday night we were going to go on a date, and we have. And that's been 35 years ago. We've missed a few Friday nights here and there, but not many. We go on dates. Now, there were many times in our marriage when we were, let me tell you, really in a tough financial situation. So we would eat, tuna salad at home and go and share a dessert at a restaurant. Somehow being in a restaurant and having a conversation makes that conversation so much better than being at home where you've got the laundry and you've got the bills and you've got things to do, right? We decided that we were going to speak to one another in a positive way. One of the keys psychologists tell us that is a predictor of a relationship going south is when the positive to the negative comments are greater than 5 to 1. If it's 5 positive to 1 negative, they can make it. But if it's 5 positive and 4 negatives, they're tanking. I remember making a list of all the things that I really appreciated about Debbie. And at first it went slow, but then it really began to pick up steam. And I thought, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, gosh, she does that well. Well, yeah, she does this. And before long I thought, wow, there's really something here. The last thing we decided was that we were going to work on the only person that we could change. I couldn't change Debbie, and Debbie couldn't change me. That's impossible. But I could change me with God's help, and she could change herself with God's help. And we picked out things that we thought needed to change. And when I saw her growing and changing in ways I hadn't expected, it gave me confidence, and I began to work on it. And when she saw me growing and changing, it gave her confidence. I've never had a marriage counseling situation where 100% of the problem was with this spouse and 0% of the problem was with this one. Never. Now, maybe 75%, 25%, but there's always things that each of us can work on. When I'm in a marital counseling situation and it's apparent that he thinks 100% of the problem is there and she thinks 100% of the problem is there, literally I have said, well, we're done here. I mean, there's no reason to go on if you can't find anything that you can do to change. And our marriage began to improve. And we still went through the dip, when our kids were teenagers. Everybody does. The kids are gone now. And I want to tell you that our marriage now is the best it has ever been. Ever. Isn't it, babe? Yeah. We absolutely, she's my best friend. We absolutely enjoy being together. It's the best it's ever been. Now, I know I'm speaking to many here who have been through divorce. And I don't want you to leave here thinking, oh, I failed. Divorce is not what anybody intends. God said, I hate divorce. It's a sin like any other sin. And it's heavy and it has consequences, but we ask forgiveness and we receive it and we move on. Bill and Lori Sugar, Bill is a OBGYN. He might have delivered several of your kids. I talked to him this week, and in fact, I was hoping that he would share, but he's in New York City right now. And he talked about the grace the Lord has given, and he said this, one thing is grace. God gives grace, but he doesn't eliminate earthly consequences. And he went on and said, the incredible stress and trauma their children went through. He said, for 16 of the 20 years, we were shocked. We thought, we could solve our problem in 30 minutes like a sitcom. But it wasn't easy to do. And he says, so if a couple is married now and they're saying, oh, we kind of fell in love. He said, well, fall back in love. We are, as I mentioned last week, part of a large group of people that look to John Wesley as one of our molders of our faith. And he says, God doesn't command what his grace does not enable. So if you're in a marriage now and it's tough, you can make it work. It's God's intention for it to work. I hope you will. If you've been through divorce and you're remarried, or you've been through divorce and you're not remarried, receive his forgiveness and his grace. You don't need to revisit it. It's pointless. He loves you. He's given you a new day. It's time to move on. But determine that the marriage you're in now will go the distance. Or determine if you get remarried, it will go the distance. Because what Jesus is after is people who love him from the inside out. The kind of followers Jesus desires are those who harbor no resentment or anger or contempt with one another. Those who carefully guard each other's reputations. The type of follower Jesus desires are those who are pure with one another. And there's no hidden scenarios going on in their mind as they think about this person. Followers Jesus desires are those who honor the vows they've made, even when painful, until death do part. In other words, he is desirous of a holy people, holy from the inside out, not just abiding by an external code, do not murder, do not commit adultery, but those who are loving him and following him from the heart, being holy from the inside out. It's inconvenient faith. But it's more glorious than we can imagine. Would you bow your heads with me? My Father in heaven, I thank you for this group of people, and I pray your blessing upon them. And I pray where there are problems between some of them, or problems with some of them with people who aren't here, that you will give them the wisdom and the courage to resolve those issues. And where there is mental images and thoughts and scenarios in their minds about another person sexually, I pray that you will help them remove that and never replace it. And I pray that you will help them to swim upstream against the current of this age, to honor and love the one you have given them in their youth. We are your people, and we long to be holy from the inside out. We pray these things, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Just before I have you stand, I'll remind you that there's a place of prayer here at the close of our service.